So you gave 2 weeks notice and you left?
Gave my 2 weeks notice and I left. So Pratt & Whitney at the time was training machinists. So I went into their machinist apprentice program. So I learned how to operate a turret lathe. And when I graduated, after 4 weeks, they sent me over to the East Hartford plant, and I was working on the third shift at the aircraft. Now, my oldest brother was a machinist, had been a machinist for all his life. He said, this is a really good program, you know, you're going to do well there, blah, 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 blah. I was bored out of my mind. I wasn't a machinist. It didn't do anything for me. And then they made it worse by they put me on a computer operated machine, which means you put the piece of metal down on the machine, you tightened everything up, put new cutting edges on it, you punched the button and you watched it go round and round. And it took about an hour and a half to cut the thing. And you didn't, that's it. Then you do the same thing all over again. And I saw people shuffling around the place. And I said, you know, God bless them, they can do it, but I can't do this. So I was there for 3 months. And I gave my notice, and they said, no, you really have a lot of potential here. You know, you could move up in the company. Well, you know what? I probably could. I said, but no, I'm a different kind of person. So I was looking for a job, and I saw that Singer Sewing Machine was hiring people. So I went down there, and I got hired, and they taught me a little bit of basics about being a repairman to fix the sewing machines. And they gave me a truck. And so next thing you know, I'm out going to people's houses, fixing their sewing machines, selling them sewing machines, learned all the, and I did it for almost a year. I was having a good time. In fact, I met my wife while I was doing that.
Did you fix her sewing machine?
Yeah, I did. I fixed her up real good. So I used to go, but I would get my truck in the morning and they give you like 10 service calls. So what I do is I get in my truck, I drive back to my house, and I'd make a call, and if they didn't answer, I didn't go there because I figured they weren't home. So I was living the life. I'd be working 4 hours a day, getting paid for 8. I mean, it was great, plus getting paid commission, and I was very good at it. And then certain days of the week you had to work in the store, and I was very good at that too because I could sell things. So I stayed there for a while, and I realized that sewing machines were not going to be the future. Maybe I should set my sights a little higher. And so I decided to take my birthday off. Well, my boss didn't like that idea. I said, I'm not going to work on my birthday. He says, well, you haven't asked for it off. And I said, well, I'm telling you right now, I'm not coming in on my birthday. And I guess he considered that insubordination. So he said, well, if you do that, that's like quitting. And I said, okay. I quit. So I left. And the next week I went down to Sears and I applied for a job at Sears. And I kind of liked that a little bit better, and I spent 18 years at Sears, 18 and a half years at Sears. And this is, by the way, a month after I quit the job at the sewing machine, a month after we became engaged. So went over real big with her father. Yeah.
Yeah. This is my future son-in-law.
Yeah, my future son-in-law, and he's going to be sponging off of my daughter.
Did you go back to school on the GI Bill at all?
Yes, I did. I went to Sears, and I was there for 5 years before I decided to go back to school. And I went to MCC, Manchester Community College, and I did very, very okay there because I was working full-time and I was going to school full-time. You know, some subjects I enjoyed, and I did well in those, and those I didn't, I passed. I did well enough. So I got my associate's degree from there in 1978. Well, just about that time I was at Sears, I needed another outlet. So one of my friends that was at Sears said, you know, you should think about coming into the National Guard. And I said, why? Weekend warrior? He says, yeah. He says, it's a little bit extra money. He says, and it'll give you a chance to do something different than what you're doing. Because, you know, you're walking around in a suit or you're wearing a tie all week, you know, clean. He said, it'll give you a chance to, you know, rough it up with the boys. So, this is 1978. My wife's just had our third child. Okay, our third son has been born. And I tell her, I'm going to go join the Army. And she's obviously not thrilled. But I said, we'll try it for a year, see how it works out. And that was 1978, and I ended up leaving them in 2007.
So I guess it worked out.
It worked out pretty well. So I went there, and I went in as an E4, which is what I got out of the Army as. And the next year I was an E5, and the year after that I was an E6, and the year after that I was E7. So, whoa, this is pretty good. So by 1982 I was an E7, and that's where I stayed until 2000 when I made Master Sergeant. But they kept asking me in the Army. They said, you know, you really have a knack for this kind of stuff. Maybe you should do this full time. And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of happy at Sears, and things started changing at Sears. So I decided maybe I should look elsewhere. And the final straw was they took me off hourly and they put me on salary, and you know, well, you don't have to work 40 hours a week. No, but you want me to work 60 hours a week for the same pay. So I realized that I wasn't going to get any higher with them, so I went to work for the Army, full-time, in the recruiting command.
Before you went full-time with them, what were your duties as a National Guardsman?
All right, when I joined the National Guard, the first thing they did was they put me in the operations section. And the guy that swore me in was Captain Byrne. He says, you know, I'm going to have you as my driver. And he says, I'm going to ask you a lot of important stuff. You know, he was fluffing me up. He wanted a driver and a chooch. And I found it out when we went to the woods for the first weekend. He was driving around and wait for him while he talked about stuff. All he was doing is driving him around. And so I said, this is not good. So we kind of hit a few puddles at the wrong speed and got him wet. And so then I was no longer his driver. They put me back in operations section. I said, you know, is there something else I can do, you know, because I can be busy, you know, put me with the...
Well, and what was the time requirement? Was this the...
1 weekend a month. This was 1 weekend a month.
And you would actually stay there at the...
Yep. Yep, we go away, most of the time we go away for the weekend. We go down to Stone's Ranch or someplace and do the operations. So they said, well, we're going to put you in the support platoon. I says, okay, what do? They said, well, they're in charge of all the supplies, you know. Well, I worked in a store, so I said, okay, that sounds like something more up my alley. And so it actually was up my alley, and I enjoyed it. So next thing you know, I get promoted, and then I get promoted again, and I'm in charge of this, I'm in charge of that, because I actually have an aptitude for that kind of thing, ordering supplies, transporting supplies, making sure people do things, ordering people around. I kind of like that. So I stayed in the support platoon, and I was doing very well. And then the next thing you know, I'm the support platoon sergeant. So I'm in charge of the whole support platoon. And I was good at it, very, very good at it. And so the Army says, you really should come on board full time, but the only thing we got now is in recruiting. You know, you might have to sell people. And I said, I've been a salesman for years. I was at Sears. I ran, you know, several departments selling for them. So I joined the recruiting command.
So you actually then were full-time National Guard?
I was full-time National Guard in 1986. July 1986, I went full-time.
Until when did you retire?
January 2007.
Oh, so you stuck with it for quite a while. Did you stay as a recruiter that entire time?
I stayed in the recruiting command that entire time, yes.
What were your duties?
Well, at first I was a production recruiter, which is, yeah, you go out and you sign people up. And I worked at different stations as a recruiter. And I started to find out how the promotion system worked was that I needed to get more points because they go by your education and stuff like that. And even though I had an associate's degree, I figured I probably need a bachelor's degree to get promoted. So I went back to college again, only I went to Anna Maria College. And Anna Maria was running an external off-campus program, whereas they'd take people from the military or from the police, they'd take all your credits together, you know, slap them together and say, okay, this is how many college credits you need from us. The reason I chose them was because they wanted less classes than Eastern did. So I went to them. I still had to get 15 classes from them. So I started going to school and working as a recruiter. And in 2000, I got my bachelor's degree with honors from Anna Maria College. And yes, I did go to my graduation ceremony. So,
where is Anna Maria?
Paxton, Mass. Very nice little school.
So you drive up there to go to classes?
Nope, my classes were held in Springfield. And again, I learned about it from some other friends in the military that were thinking about doing it, but they never followed through. So I get my college degree, and there's an opportunity for promotion, and bingo, I'm a master sergeant. So that was good. Now I'm in charge of a recruiting team. So I had a recruiting team in Manchester, and I had one out of Hartford, which meant that I was in charge of like 10 recruiters. And my teams did very well. So there comes an opportunity. Somebody moved up, and I got promoted to Sergeant Major. So now I'm the Sergeant Major of the Recruiting Command, which was E9 position, which made me very happy. Made a lot of other people unhappy, but it made me happy, made her happy, and the retirement time became very, very good. So I was a Sergeant Major of the Recruiting Command for the next 4 years, from 2003 to 2007. And when I retired, the day I retired, the next day afterwards, I was hired back as a contractor working the program that I had brought into the state when I was a Sergeant Major, which was a recruit sustainment program. And they said, well, you brought it to life. There's no one better to run it. And I stayed there for 5 years. And then I hit, the magic number 65 and told them I was leaving.
So you retired as a Sergeant Major?
I retired as a Sergeant Major. I went to the Sergeant Major's Academy and everything, so. Which is the equivalent of getting a master's degree, because it's 600 hours of studying before you go to the campus.
Would you say that your experience in Vietnam and your own service helped you with your National Guard duties?
Yes, I think it helped me tremendously. It gave me a little bit different perspective of things.
When you went back to the National Guard, that was years after the Vietnam War, so we weren't actually in a war. Did you see a difference in the kind of guys that you were recruiting? How had things changed since your day?
Yes, I did. Now, from the active duty, I had the bias against the National Guard. And because that was mostly people went there because they were hiding from the Vietnam War. And they didn't want to take people such as myself who were real soldiers because they did their, things their way. I wasn't as impressed with some of their officers and some of their NCOs. I thought they were, substandard in many cases to what I had been experiencing. But as I stayed with them longer, my perspective changed because I realized that most of them were just there for the weekend. It was a much more relaxed atmosphere than it was on active duty when you're there 24/7. I mean, these guys would show up and, they're there for 2 days and then they go back to their real job. And some of these guys were there because they really enjoyed it. And I said, you know what, it was good because, what did you do during the weekend? Well, I was out shooting or I was, doing those kind of, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Since you stayed in the National Guard so long, you actually have seen the evolution of it over several decades now. How do you see the change in the National Guard as it is today and the caliber?
The caliber of the National Guard right now is very, very high. When I first got into the National Guard, there was never any thought about them being deployed outside of the United States. All that changed with the Gulf War, and that didn't change that much in the Gulf War because they were in and out. And now, it's not the National Guard, it's the International Guard, it looks like. I have friends that are being deployed for the second and third time in the last 10 years. So we got to the point where we telling the kid, well, there's a chance you might be deployed. When I was first recruiting, there's a chance, but it's a remote chance. To now, when we recruit somebody, say, look, it's not a chance, it's going to happen. You are going to be deployed. You may not be deployed to a war zone, but you are going to spend a year of your life somewhere else in your education system and stuff like that. So it was different. The professional training is much harder than it was before. To advance in the ranks, it's not the good old boy system as much as it used to be. I mean, there's still some instances of it, but it's a lot harder. You have to be more of a professional. You have to know everything because you will be on active duty.
Do you still have your bias of active duty?
No, not at all. Actually, it's in many cases it's the opposite way. Because when I was recruiting for a while, I worked with the aviation units, and the aviation units, I think they're better than the active duty aviation units, and here's why. The active duty aviation units, somebody gets to a unit and they're there for what, 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then they move around. These guys have been, some of them have been together for 15 years. The mechanics have been doing the same job. Some of them have been doing it for 20 years or more. They know those aircraft. The pilots, the number of hours that they're required to fly is incredible for a part-time job. And we have full-time instructor pilots up there. They're superb pilots. I mean, so I would put our pilots, I would put our air crews against anything that I've ever seen on active duty. And when they come back from a deployment, they come back with awards, big awards. Our MP company came back with huge awards. Why? Our MPs, a lot of them are civilian cops, state troopers. So they bring something to the game that you don't see on active duty. You know, you don't see just the Army way. You see the real world way mixed in with the Army way. So it's a bias.
Have you ever been back up in a helicopter since you left Vietnam?
Yes. I've gone for several flights. When I was recruiting, I was going all the time. And when I was assigned to the aviation headquarters as a recruiter up there, I used to go out every chance I could because I loved it.
Do you miss that?
I miss helicopter rides, yeah. That was fun.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes. I'm a member of the VFW in South Windsor. I'm a member of the American Legion. In fact, I'm the treasurer of the local post. And I'm now on the South Windsor Patriotic Commission. I'm the chairman of that.
Are you involved actively in what kinds of things do your...
Oh, the Patriotic, well, as a treasurer of the American Legion, I keep the book. You know, not a big deal. But I don't go to any of their conferences or any of that other stuff. Don't do any of that. As far as the Patriotic Commission, we run 12 different things for the town of South Windsor every year. And I've got 12 people on my committee. And I was introduced to it by Command Sergeant Major Mueller, who was wanting to get out of it. So he got me to join the committee when I retired. He recruited his replacement. So when I retired from the Army, he says, now you can join the Patriotic Commission. I said, now I'll do it. So I joined the Patriotic Commission, and then shortly thereafter I was away in October, and they decided to have an election. And I came back and found out I was the chairman. So I didn't protest too much. I took it over. And I think we do a good job. We run the Veterans Day program. We have a program in town. We run the Memorial Day program and parade. We run the Soldiers in the Schools. We run an essay contest. We have an Armed Forces Day big program that we run every year. And that concludes with fireworks, and that's what I'm working on now. We have a lot of little things that we do, you know, put flags on the graves and stuff like that. And we assist the American Legion in running their Wreaths Across America program, which is just caught on. It's 3 years in South Windsor, and it's doing good. They're up to almost 800 wreaths. And they started out 2 years ago with less than 75 wreaths, and now we're up to 800 wreaths that they're putting on the graves of the veterans in South Windsor. So we really do support it. And when I get some other things squared away, I wanted to volunteer down at the Veterans Hospital. I want to be a driver for the VVA. So you might say I'm wrapped up in that.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
I think it matured me. You know, some of the things I've saw and some of the things I've read has changed my opinion a lot. And I've always been interested in history, and so after Vietnam, I started reading, you know, a little bit about the history of Vietnam and what went on. And somebody turned me on to a book, and it was called The Bright Shining Lie, the story of John Paul Vance. And I said, wow. And that was very, very detailed about the, and I says, you know what? There's an awful lot that we just didn't pay attention to. A lot of things we didn't pay attention to. And so it kind of changed my mind about, you know, why we were there in the first place, and made me look with a new set of eyes onto there and say, it was different. So you've read the book, obviously.
I haven't read it in total, but I skimmed it, and
It's huge.
Yeah.
I've got it in hardcover.
You recommend it then?
I would highly recommend that book, because he goes into the history of the Vietnam War, and I've read it a couple times, and the first time I was reading about how the Americans fought the war, looking at it from that perspective, how we fought it and the mistakes that we made. And then the more I read it, and I'm saying, well, maybe the mistake was why were we there in the first place. And now I understand more about why we were there. Okay? Doesn't make it good, doesn't make it bad, just I understand more about it. And I'd be a little more reluctant to commit the kind of troops that we did to anything.
How would you say that your service in Vietnam affected your life?
I think it made me grow up. I think I grew up a lot more than my friends who didn't go. Yeah, I'd say right there that I grew up. I learned a lot of things. I was forced to mature and make, you know, life-altering decisions. And I took it with a lot more seriously than a lot of people did. You know, stuff they did because they'd never been in this situation.
Kent, before we close, think back to your time in Vietnam, and is there any story or memorable incident that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add?
No, I think we talked about Mr. Easley shooting out of his helicopter. We talked about meeting. And
he was later killed in action?
He was later killed in action because he made a very critical error, and he was doing it all along, and he just never got caught at it earlier. And the problem was when you make a gun run at somebody, you got to break off before you're over them, and because you're very vulnerable. And that's how he got killed, because he didn't break off fast enough, and he got shot right up from underneath the helicopter like that. There was that, and he took things personal. And one of our two funny stories. Okay, well, maybe not so funny, but the rockets that you load could get set off with one battery. Okay, the electronic charge from one battery. So static electricity could set them off. So you had to be very careful when you're sliding these rockets down. Now they go down straight and they're sliding, and when they come out, then the little fins come out. Now, they're not super laser. You have to point and shoot. That was what it hit. Whatever you were pointing at when you pushed the button, that's what it hit. So we were sitting in the mess hall in Da Nang, and they were loading the spotter rockets on a bird dog, which is a little Piper Cub type airplane, and they were putting the rockets in. Well, they put one of them down too fast. It created static electricity, and it goes whoosh. It flew over our mess hall, and we're all hitting the ground because it sounds like it's going to hit us. And it landed, you know, about a half mile down in the middle of the Special Forces camp. They were ripping. So that's one funny story. Well, maybe it's not so funny for them. Captain Hosey was also qualified to fly fixed wing aircraft, okay. But it had been a while. So he pushed, and they decided to let him take a check flight on a Beaver aircraft. Now we had a big landing strip at Da Nang because we used to have cargo planes landing there. He went the entire length and he didn't have his flaps up and he couldn't take off. So they pulled his fixed wing ratings down. And one other one was Captain Hill. Some old Papasan out in the field, we're flying by, and guy decides to shoot at us, and Captain Hill gets really angry and takes it personal. He shot every rocket we had at that one spot. All that was left was a hole in the ground. I mean, he shot 14 rockets into this one small spot. And just, I'm saying to him afterward, why'd you do that? You know, one would have done the job. He said, I was mad. And I said, yeah, now I'm mad because I got to rearm that aircraft. I've got to go open up each box. There's 3 rockets in a box. So I got to go open the box up and very carefully slide them in there and make sure everything's ready to go.
Did you ever have any disasters while you were rearming?
No, no. I also had the guns. We had an area we cleaned them. We had, you know what a Connex is? It's a big metal trailer. Okay. For the guns, for the helicopters, we keep the guns in one Connex, and we had another one that had buckets of cleaning solvent and stuff like that. And between the two of them, we put a roof over it, you know, with a plywood and a little door. So some of the mechanics snuck into there on a couple of occasions at nighttime after we'd already cleaned the weapons. So we go to get the weapons, and we open up the door and a big cloud of marijuana smoke. I mean, you could get stoned just walking in there. So that was different.
So they were in there to smoke pot, not to mess with the ammunition.
No, they were just there to smoke some pot, and they did it. We didn't smoke pot because, you know, you can't do that and fly. But a couple of mechanics decided to get on by.
What is your single most memorable experience in Vietnam?
The day in June of '67, when we caught the North Vietnamese company. That was the bloodiest, the scariest.
Kent, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
No. I think I've come to terms with my service. I'm proud of my service. I think I went there for the right reasons. I think I did the right thing at the time. So.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for this interview.
You're very welcome.